Hey, this is SC2 History, and this time I'm going to talk about Idra. And this is interesting because I haven't talked about Idra basically since the 2011 videos, because that's basically when he falls off, in my opinion. And he kind of just goes through the motions for the rest of his career. I think he only has one really good game after in 2012. It was against Roro in the BlizzCon finals, I believe, where he actually played a very good Zerg. But basically, what happens with Idra is he goes into WCS NA Season 1, and in a deciding match against Polt, it goes into like the end game against on Daybreak, where they kind of split the map, and Idra kind of gives up. I think that's what happens. Was it actually no? It was game one. It wasn't the deciding map. It was game one. He just kind of gives up, and it was like a typical Idra moment. But people were flaming the shit out of him because people always really hated Idra, or like Idra was like a personality that was either love or hate, and so he loses pretty quickly, and then he goes on a forum and makes a joke. I believe like the joke was, "I get paid to treat you all like fucks. Isn't that great?" or something like that. But obviously, there's some context here because Idra was somebody who had no problems with saying like this outrageous shit online, and you know what? Like there was like a giant context in terms of who he was as a player, who he was as a person. That like it wasn't really that bad when you compare it to like a bunch of the other shit that kind of leaks out from other players, in my opinion. But maybe I just have like a much higher tolerance for that. I'm not sure. In any case, the fans do something incredibly funny, in my opinion, because they give Idra the biggest favor of his life, and they ruin their own enjoyment of the game at the same time. Basically, they demand Idra gets punished. Idra is quickly removed from EG, and then Idra, he tries to find some room, maybe as a caster or an analyst, but there was no room because of WCS. They've already hired everybody, and the foreigner tournaments have basically like are winding down at this point because there's no room to schedule them, I believe, or maybe they just wanted out. I'm not exactly sure about that, but in any case, Idra realizes, oh, guess I'm out. I'm out of here. See you guys later. And so Idra realizes at the very end of his StarCraft 2 career that he already realized this, but he never liked StarCraft 2. Straight up. Never, he actually probably hated the game to a certain extent if you're talking about it relative to Brood War. But he loved the competition, and so when he was good, like when he was competitive, he could stomach it because he was fine, because he liked winning. But when he wasn't good, he kind of hated it. And that's kind of the point, was for whatever reason, Idra probably stuck around like a year too long because he wasn't competitive for like the final year of his career, basically. And so and I'm not even sure if he would have stuck around or not, but I feel like the fans kind of forced this, and then it was actually in Idra's favor. So the fans basically did Idra a solid by getting him fired in a way, even though it's kind of weird to talk about it that way. And on the other hand, the fans basically ruined their own enjoyment because Idra was a player that drew eyeballs, that drew attention, no matter who he was playing or what he was doing, no matter how bad he was. And so even now, like years later, like people will like reminisce, like, oh, I wish Idra still played StarCraft 2. And I just think in my head, like, well, like what were you expecting? Like, there's no reason for him to play it, right? But Idra was always more than just a competitor. He was an icon for so many different like esports problems, I guess that's how I'll put it. Esports problems for a competitor, that I've always found him an interesting character to look at. Not in terms of like gameplay, like in terms of gameplay, it was pretty straightforward, but in terms of what he was doing and why he was doing it and how the community reacted to him, it was very interesting, because this is a guy who wasn't interested in fame or any of that shit. He was interested in playing Brood War, and so that's why he moved over to Korea and played in the Kespa house for a long period of time, right? And when StarCraft 2 blew up, he was actually one of the first foreigners to kind of realize you have to put on a show, you have to put on a persona to entertain people. And so his persona was like a guy who didn't give a fuck, even though apparently like that's completely different from him in real life, apparently. I'm not sure. I never met him, but in any case, that's what the reports. That's what people who have met him say. So he was somebody who kind of understood that persona, but he's also somebody who disdained it, and that disdain comes out in his own comments, like the one I talked about earlier. So this was an interesting guy who kind of who kind of got lucky in the sense that he didn't have to hang it up himself. The fans forced him to, but because of that, he basically got a better life out of it, in my opinion. It sounds like the In Control video that talked about him briefly. Sounds like he's much happier now, right? And so Idra was a player who understood, who understood the entertainment part, but he's also a player. Like he kind of personifies it for me. Like if you want to be like one of the biggest icons in like an esports community, like there's going to be a bunch of, not all the time, but a lot of the time, if you want to be like genuine and honest, you're going to have a lot of haters and you're going to have a lot of fans. But so long as everybody's engaged, it doesn't really matter, except if you get really, really bad. And that's what happened, I think, in the case with Idra. Was he was really bad and he was disrespectful at the same time, and that kind of like broke the camel's back. But like I said, it was ended up being a good thing for Idra. Right now, talked about him as like a person and as a personality, but as a player, I think he's still to this day among the great foreigner players. He'd make my top 15 list, but he made it the first time. Maybe I'd have to revise it. But he's a player who had shown a lot of strength early on, who had played in Korea, who had played and beaten some Koreans before like the Kesma transfer over. But even then, like I said, he played a pretty good game against Roro, right? And so he was a player who didn't love the game, but was competitive, and he had the hard work and the discipline. And he's also a player where like the mental issues were so apparent with him that it was actually very confusing, because if you ever heard him on an analyst desk, and he did it sometimes for like the EG Masters Cup, I believe, or sometimes at events, you could tell, like, analytically speaking, he understood every single thing that was happening in a game. And he understood why you would cheese, why you would do this, or why you would stay in the game, because in reality, players very rarely play perfectly in StarCraft 2 or in any game, I suppose. And so he sounded so calm and analytical, but if you actually saw him in game, like it felt like he was like a second away from tilting or a second away from raging all of the time. And that kind of like broke my mind a little bit, because this is a guy who's like outside of the game. Like I said, he had an entertaining personality. He had no problem with shit talking, right? But if you heard the way he shit talked, and he saw the way he rage quit his games, you kind of got the feeling he had way more respect for his opponents than his opponents. He had way more respect for his opponents than his shit talk would have like given away, because this is a guy who, like, the instant like he got a disadvantage, sometimes he would just GG out of the game, like famously the hallucination game against Huck, right? And that's kind of weird, just because on some level he can analyze that people make mistakes. On another level, he can analyze he outside of the game, he can shit talk them and think they really are that bad, and he'll explain why they're bad. But inside the game, for some reason, he thinks, even though I have a disadvantage, even though this player is shit, they'll probably play it out perfectly, so fuck it. Like, that was a very strange sort of combination, and that's why he's still one of the most intriguing players in StarCraft 2 history. And that's probably, I think, why, like, these various disconnects, this conflicting emotion, his actual like play style, it's actually, if you want a modern day equivalent, I'd say actually nobody really plays like him in modern day. I'd say Scarlet in 2014 played like him, because Scarlet today plays nothing like Scarlet in 2014. So that if you want like a comparison, I guess you can go there if you know. If not, you could probably just watch one of his games. Like, I'd recommend the Idra vs. Bomber one. But basically, this is like a guy whose play style, whose personality, like his conflicting like ideas and how like they manifest themselves in the game, outside of the game, all made him a huge attraction in the StarCraft 2 circuit. And that's why even today people still think still love Idra, basically. And so that's what I think his legacy is this very polarizing figure that sort of represents a lot of different aspects of a player and the community, and a player against himself, and a bunch of very interesting sort of conflicts. So that's it. I'll see you guys later.